Hey, what paintball gun should I buy? Very common question from people just getting into the sport. They'll walk into a nice store like this, see a giant selection of guns, and to be honest, it overwhelms them. And there's almost too many choices. So they do the logical thing. They turn to anybody that can help them and they say, hey, what's my first paintball gun? So let's take a chance to answer that question.
And there's your answer. The Twister LV 1.6. Fantastic shooting gun, reliable, very efficient, very accurate, and beautiful. So thanks a lot and enjoy.
Oh, you're still there? You want more? All right, I guess we're doing this. So, let's start with mechanical. A purely mechanical paintball gun has been available on the market in one form or another since the late 80s or early 1990s. A purely mechanical paintball gun is semi-automatic. That means for each single trigger pull, one ball leaves the barrel. This type of gun is often seen as a rental gun, and it is very often the first paintball gun anybody will purchase to take home and use. So, let's start by giving you an example of how the engine works, and that's what's important to this conversation. Not really the specific gun, but the engine that drives it. So for this example, we're actually going to use an HK Army Saber. It doesn't really matter. What I'm going to try to explain to you is basic to the design of a mechanical. The other design you'd see a lot is a Tipman, and we'd call a Tipman an inline blowback, while this would be a stacked blowback. So let's get into it. What is a purely mechanical engine? So in a purely mechanical engine, you have about 800 psi arriving into the valve of the gun from your tank. That air is sitting there waiting to be released. In the meantime, you've got a hammer or striker and a bolt, and you're going to cock the gun, which is going to compress this spring, and you're going to have a whole bunch of energy waiting to be released. When you pull the trigger, you have a purely mechanical trigger linkage going on back here, which is one of the reasons you get about 3 or 4 balls per second because of that mechanical triggering system. So when you pull the trigger, the hammer is released under spring power. It flies forward. It strikes a spring-loaded valve about here. That 800 psi of air is released to do 2 jobs. One, to go up through the bolt, down the barrel, and shoot your paintball. The other part of the air is going to hit the face of this striker, and it's going to recock that assembly and get it ready for the next shot. That's mechanical. That's how they've worked for a long time. Again, this is not the only example of how mechanicals work. It's just an easy one to show you.
The next category would be electromechanical. Electromechanical guns operate the same as mechanical guns from the grip frame upwards. However, in electromechanicals, we now have a microswitch interacting with your trigger. That microswitch controls a decocking solenoid, and that in fact is what's operating the sear plate for you. The whole point of this is to get rid of the mechanical linkage between you and the operation of the gun, allowing you to have extremely fast trigger pulls. This shortened trigger pull allows players to hit 5, 10, maybe 15 balls per second. Also, the printed circuit board allows other modes of fire to be programmed into the gun, like full auto, but you should always check with your field to see what modes of fire you're actually allowed to use. Furthermore, this electronic trigger pull does not affect the accuracy, distance, air efficiency, etc., of a mechanical versus an electromechanical. For a long time, electromechanicals represented a nice price point in between the less expensive mechanicals and the much more expensive electro-pneumatics. However, as time has gone on, these seem to have gotten squeezed off the market by the falling prices of electro-pneumatics. We see less and less of them being represented as choices for first-time buyers, and less of them showing up at fields in the hands of first-time players.
The next important category of paintball guns, and especially the engines that drive them, would be an electro-pneumatic. An electro-pneumatic style paintball gun is driven by 4 things. 1, a regulator. A regulator is used in an electro-pneumatic paintball gun to get the pressure much further down than what a mechanical would use, typically about 150 to 100 psi. So very low pressure is achieved via a regulator. Next very important piece is a chipboard of some kind. A motherboard will contain the electronics needed to drive the next item, which is a solenoid. A solenoid, in paintball terms, is essentially an electromagnet that controls a valve. So a solenoid is the heart, along with the chipboard, of every modern electro-pneumatic gun. A final little add-on piece that all modern electro-pneumatic guns have is a set of vision eyes. And a set of vision eyes will sit in the breech. They will emit a beam, and what they're looking for is a paintball. Is the paintball seated correctly? And if it is, and you pull the trigger, the gun will allow it to fire. If the paintball is not seated correctly in the breech, the chipboard will very wisely say, nope, I'm not going to fire, because if I do, I'm much more likely to break a paintball. These don't prevent all paintball breakage, but they are an enormous improvement over not having eyes. So, again, this is just a single example. This happens to be a Planet Eclipse 170R. It is far from the only. And another secret of electro-pneumatics is how small and light the moving parts are in the gun. In this case, the bolt is a very small and, just as importantly, very light piece of the gun, and so your felt recoil is very low. Recoil on a paintball gun is not significant to any noticeable outside observer, but recoil does affect accuracy when you're at a high rate of fire. And so by having very lightweight components, you keep the recoil down and you increase your accuracy. So a lot of times when people see electro-pneumatics being used the first time, their observation is, wow, the gun's nice because it shoots at a high rate of fire. And it does that. It does that primarily because of its trigger. The trigger on electro-pneumatic is a tiny, tiny mouse click type trigger. It's usually a micro switch driving the trigger. Matter of fact, here's an example of a micro switch. You can see on the board. So this is similar to a mouse click on a PC, and it means that your trigger pull is extremely small, extremely light. So the first time you see somebody using these, you think, wow, they just shoot really fast, and that's the only reason that people want them. They do shoot really fast, but they do everything else better than a mechanical. They're more air efficient, they're lighter weight, they're more ergonomically comfortable, they break a lot less paint, and most importantly, in my opinion, they're very accurate. So electro-pneumatic guns do almost everything better than a mechanical, except for one thing, and that's price. They're obviously expensive. Currently, as of late 2021, the electro-pneumatic market starts realistically probably around $400, and you can spend up to $2,000 on an electro-pneumatic gun. Another interesting category of paintball guns that's just starting to emerge is what I'm going to call the next generation mechanical guns, or new generation of mechanical guns. The engine that drives these is not like the previous mechanical gun I showed you. So why? A few years ago, an interesting thing happened. Some of the old timers of the sport decided, hey, I really miss using my mechanical gun from way back in the day, and I wouldn't mind trying it out again. So they started forming tournaments using mechanical-only guns. And it turns out they were really popular. You had a lot of players that missed the good old days of using their mechanical guns, and the tournaments caught on. And now all around the country you can find mechanical-only paintball tournaments. As they became more popular, the manufacturers of those high-end electro-pneumatic guns took notice, and they said, hey, how can we get in on that market? And what they started doing is designing their guns still using the high-end bolt kit and regulator of their electro-pneumatics, but doing so with a mechanical trigger, thus being mechanical tournament legal. So here's a good example of one. There's a few of these on the market now, and I think they represent a nice sweet spot for players that don't want to go ahead and spend all the money on an electro-pneumatic, but they want the best shooting mechanical they can get. And so this is a bolt kit of this particular gun, and this gun is an Emac from Planet Eclipse. Again, it's not that important what gun it is. And like the earlier electro-pneumatic I showed you, it has the same bolt. So very lightweight part. Regulator, stepping the pressure way, way down to about 100, 150 psi. So it's very gentle and accurate in the way that it launches a ball, and it has a mechanical trigger, which makes it legal at any of these mechanical tournaments. So this is the second generation mechanical guns that are now starting to get onto the market, and they're a pretty interesting category, and I think worth a look. A subcategory of paintball guns would be mag-fed. Mag-fed paintball guns are either the traditional mechanical design or the newer second generation mechanical design I mentioned earlier. What they all have in common, of course, is a magazine. The magazines are spring-loaded, and they're filled with either 10 or 20 paintballs, depending on what magazine you got. Magazines are not interchangeable from design to design, so you want to make sure you buy the correct one that fits your particular paintball gun. MagFed is a lot of fun when you find a MagFed crowd to play against, and that puts you all on even footing. That's not to say that you can't take a MagFed gun and go play against traditional hopper feed paintball guns. You're definitely at a disadvantage. You don't have the firepower with somebody that has 200 rounds of paint sitting in a hopper. So you can use a little bit more skill to overcome that, or maybe you just enjoy handicapping yourself and challenging yourself. Some of these MagFed guns, including this particular one, which is from Tippmann, can do both. They can do hopper feed. So in this gun, you'd remove the traditional spring-fed magazine, replace it with a dummy magazine, and then you'd install a hopper adapter, an elbow, and then your hopper on it. So this kind of gun can do both of that. I still consider this a subcategory. It's not its entirely own category because the engine that drives it is not unique to MagFed guns. A subcategory of mechanical guns would be pistols. They are mechanical in their nature, and they are magazine fed. They are not, however, a really high performance paintball gun compared to even regular magazine fed full-size rifles. They're rather limited in ammo, they're limited in air supply because they use disposable 12 grams typically, and they have a pretty short barrel, which means they're not great for accuracy out to long distances. They are, in my opinion, very handy backup guns, and they can be a lot of fun, especially against other mag-fed players. However, new players to the sport will often see these, and it instantly invokes dreams of running down a paintball field, dual-wielding pistols, shooting people left and right, and doing acrobatic jumps over bunkers. Those dreams tend to end in terror. It doesn't work real well against players that know what they're doing and are using even your average mechanical gun. This is a real disadvantage. Still can be fun. You can still choose to challenge yourself and go play it, but it's more of a backup type gun.
Since the dawn of time, the Tippmann name has been one that's been purchased again and again as a first-time marker, and for good reason. They're durable, they're made to last. You'll often see them being used decades after they were purchased. If there is a downside to them, they are harder to take apart and especially put back together for a first-time user. They're what we call an inline blowback, and they're definitely a mechanical. So they're a solid choice and will be a solid choice for first-time gun purchase into the foreseeable future. Most of their line uses the same basic engine. Names like the Cronus, the Stormer, the Mono 98, the A5 are all essentially the same gun with a different look. There are a few outliers to that. The Tippmann Tip X, which is a pistol, is a mechanical, but it's probably not something that I'd recommend as a first time, as I mentioned earlier. The Striker is in fact an Electro-Pneumatic. It's not a mechanical. Besides that, you can pretty much buy any of them that have the features you like, and you're rest assured you're going to get a pretty good paintball gun. If your budget allows you to get into the Electro-Pneumatic sphere, then probably my first two recommendations would be either the Empire Mini GS or the Planet Eclipse Etha 2. Both are great choices for Electro-Pneumatics. They shoot almost as well as their $1,000 bigger brothers, and they're pretty reliable and well made. Great choices. For a second-gen mechanical marker, I think probably the best recommendation at this moment in time is the Planet Eclipse Emac. The Emac uses the same bolt core, the same gamma core as their high-end guns. It shoots great, it's reliable, it's well made, it's durable, and it's pretty reasonably priced. Well within the price range of a lot of the other mechanicals that are on the market, but you're going to get better performance out of it.
So this last section, I want to concentrate on some advice to parents, and I suspect a lot of the people that might be watching this are parents who have kids that are telling them they want to get their first paintball gun, which is great. So first off, I wanted to talk about Milsim. Milsim, this is a good example of it. Milsim is any paintball gun that tries to look like a real firearm. This stuff, Milsim, is like catnip to a 12-year-old. So a common argument you'll get from your 10, 11, 12-year-old kid saying, this is the paintball gun I need, this is the best thing to play with. They have no idea what the engine is underneath it. They're simply falling in love with the form factor. So while a marker like this, and this is from Tipman, runs you currently about $280, the exact same engine, be something like this, would run you about $150. And if you show this to your kid, they're going to object that, no, this isn't a good paintball gun, even though what they don't know is the engine inside is the exact same engine. Nothing against Milsim, if that's what they're into and the budget works, and, go for it. Just be aware that a common argument you will get from your child is that I have to have this gun. And they're going to give you arguments. Most of those arguments are false. It's really they want it because of how it looks. So the last part of this video, also directed towards the parents, is about parent logic. I think I just described kid logic, which is Milsim is best. A very common refrain I hear from parents is they're beginner players, so they need a beginner gun. And that's really not a good logic train for getting your kid his first paintball gun. A much better question is, where are they going to be playing, and who are they going to be playing against? They're going to play at one of two different places. They're either going to play at a backyard game where a friend has some woods, in which case it's actually pretty easy. Simply go take a look at what level of equipment is being used back in that woods game, and you can roughly mimic it. And if you do that, that's fine. Your kid will have a good time. However, the other places that people play are commercial fields. And in commercial fields, you're going to see a little bit of everything being shot back at you. So you're going to see basic mechanicals, you'll see rental guns, you'll see high-end Electro-Pneumatic guns, you'll see some mag-fed, you'll see a little bit of everything. So in that environment, the logic of, well, he's a beginner, so we should get a beginner gun, really doesn't hold up real well. The people shooting back at him are not going to shoot back at him differently just because he's a beginner with a beginner gun. So if the budget allows it, I would get something Electro-Pneumatic if they're going to be playing at large commercial fields, just because they're going to have a little bit of everything shot back at them. So that's it. You've got a ton of choices for getting into paintball. I hope I helped you out, and I hope you make some good choices. Thank you.